doing the John Dillinger, and Bill's well versed in that, and we're going to try to keep this around 10 minutes. I got a feeling it's going to go a little longer that day. So, and finally, June 18th, I'm going to be doing the Park Lane history, because Park Lane, this coming year, 2015, it will be the 55th anniversary of Park Lane being built. So that's what's going to be on the agenda in the future. I just want to go kind of like over the agenda, what you can expect week in and week out. Scripture will speak around 10 minutes. This is not about us, it's about you sharing your items and the history of them items with us. So it's about you, not us. Then you will have an opportunity to introduce your item, tell about it, or view the items. Maggie has set up the Thomas Crabtree room tonight, so when we're done, we're going to go in there and you can view them. You can talk to the person that owns the items. I have some already set up over there. And after I get done, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So I'm going to start by asking you, how many people have heard of John Paul? Wow, pretty much everyone. Okay. All right. Well, John Paul is recorded as being the first settler in New Carlisle, and many believe that he was the first settler in Clark County. Well, there's a controversy about that, and I included an article in your packet that kind of speaks to that. As far as John Paul coming here, it's a mystery. It's shrouded mystery, and there's so many stories out there. It's kind of difficult to wade through them and see what's right and what's wrong, and the information's not out there. A lot of the records were destroyed at one time or another. Well, John Paul allegedly came to this area in 1790. He had 5 children and a wife, and one day while they were planting their crop, they were known for their corn. Actually, they were supposed to have been the first people that sell corn in Miami County. And while they were planting their crop on the forks of Honey Creek, Shawnee Indians attacked, which killed John Paul Sr., his wife, and 3 children. Well, 2 of the children, John Paul Jr. and his sister Mary, was able to escape and head back to the cabin that they had built. And they lived there until like 1820, before they actually built the brick house, which the photo I showed you just now, that's the house they built around 1820. That house actually stood well in the 1970s. During the middle 70s, they actually, the Historical Society made an effort to try to save that house. And for one reason or another, it just never got done, and it slowly deteriorated, and it's gone now. It pretty much was gone in the early 1990s. Can anyone tell me the different names that New Carlisle was referred to at one time or another? Mike? York, yes. York was, I actually have the deed for York. I'm going to pass that around. The town of York was deeded in Champaign County, because this was actually Champaign County at the time. It was March 21st, 1810. And as you notice on that map, you actually see John Paul's. There's 2 streets, one named called John, one's named Paul. It's on there. The actual town of York is believed to exist maybe 80 rods, which is 16.5 feet each rod, west of present-day New Carlisle, which takes it down around Scott to Clay Street. So that's where originally the York was supposed to have been. Well, in 1816, John Paul, the first settler, sold what we know as New Carlisle to William Rayburn, for $800. I'll pass that around. William Rayburn, on July of 1918, decided he was going to plat this. So he did, and when he finished platting it, they changed the name. Because anyone knows what that name went to? Monroe. They changed them after President Monroe. So the streets that you would be familiar with that when Monroe was here would be Jefferson, Madison, Jackson, Main, and Church Street were actual streets of that Monroe. Okay, well, that's pretty much all I have. Like I said, it's going to be short, and I'm here for questions, if you have any questions. Yeah, Bill?
Dave, remember that Graveman really started that project in 1810, and which we celebrate our bicentennial that year, but it wasn't. You were correct on the 1860s when it was finally, the deed was finally all.
It took transition time to get it to the Monroe. And there's rumors that at one time that New Carlisle was actually called Pierceville. Well, supposedly in 1928, March, we turned to New Carlisle. Well, January to March, New Carlisle was supposedly called Pierceville, but I've done extensive deed research at the recorder's office, and I found deeds throughout that period of time. None of them says Pierceville. So I'm pretty convinced that that's a fallacy and it never occurred. So, yes, John?
Some of the streets on here, I don't recognize them.
Yes, they deed that out, and it might have been a financial thing where it actually never did come to fruition. And here's the Monroe, the plat of Monroe. So you're right, and you'll look and you'll see some strange names on there, and actually none of them. There's a lot I don't recognize. There is a street called York on there, though.
York?
York. So, and if you look at the deed real close, it don't refer it to as York. It actually refers it to as New York. So that's interesting. Yes, John.
If any of you have been up to Holmes County in Tuscarawas, there's a town up there called Walnut Creek. It's right on Route 39. And they applied for a post office, and it was called, they wanted to call the town New Carlisle. And they applied for a post office, and the post office people told them, no, there's already a New Carlisle in southwestern Ohio, so they named it Walnut Creek then.
Bill?
Another item that might be interesting is the fact that most of the early history that we have of the town was written by Dr. Young, H.H. Young, and that was in the later 1800s. So whatever information, I think the idea of Pierceville and some of that information was simply passed down, and whether it's true, allegedly true or not, we will never know that for sure. But that's where some of that early history came from, where it was Pierceville, and then it became Carlisle, Ohio. We were Carlisle, and that's when the post office first became involved, and we had to change our name because it was a Carlisle, Ohio, south of Dayton. So it became, all we did was add New Carlisle.
And
that's how we got that name.
And a lot of information we have received is from the Presbyterian Church's records. A lot of that was derived from their records, because I believe it was 1896 we lost a lot of our records through one of our fires that we had up on Main Street. Now, I'm not for sure if you know this, but actually we had two major fires on Main Street on the west side of Main Street, and it burnt from one end to a building which is owned by Alvin Putterball right now, and that building is fireproofed. So it stopped there. Years later, it actually burned again on the other side and stopped at Mr. Putterball's building. So all the buildings to the left and the right of Alvin's building is actually new buildings that were built later. And Alvin's building, I was told it's around 1872, but I think it's more like in the 1880s it was built, so. Any more questions?
The paper you passed said the streets were 2 poles wide and 4 poles wide, and the alleys were 1 pole. How many feet in a pole?
Well, a pole and a rod's the same size,
Oh,
and it's 16.5 feet.
They call them poles.
Yes, I think time change, they refer to as something else. Did you have a question? Yes.
Yeah, the David Lowry was on there. I was wondering whether Mike or any of them, was that their relation down the road?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Yeah.
So the Monroe's going around, and the York, and the deed for when Rayburn received it from John Paul, so you're welcome to look at that. We're going to open up the room whenever you want, and you can bring your items in, lay them out, and people can come around and ask you questions about it. And I know there's some interesting items people's already showed me tonight, so I'm looking forward to seeing them myself. Yes.
I got one question, and I'll ask you and Mr. Barry, since you're here, Bill. I forget I know you've seen the photo. It's, I believe it's a Carlisle Inn, and there's a sign, it's a little hazy, but it says fresh oysters. Where were they getting fresh oysters from? Not FedEx.
Bill answered that one.
Honey Creek.
Honey Creek.
I wondered,
Yes,
you know,
Kathy.
there was something, and I did a little research on that at one time.
You did.
There was something that was not a true oyster.
Okay.
When they referred to a certain food that you could make, and it seems to me it was dough, I'd have to go back and check some of my research, but it was something that you made, and they call them oysters.
Huh.
Oh, brother. Out of the ocean.
What about the salmons that we have in the waterways around here?
We have some of those.
Yeah, now there's some pretty big ones. So could they have
Back then.
referred to them as oysters?
Well, in that research that I did, it referenced to them when you saw that term used in history, that it usually was some item of food that they made that they called it an oyster, but it wasn't, it really wasn't.
That explains it.
Yes. I wondered that too. That's that 1877 photo, and weird.
Right.
It didn't get here till 1882, so it couldn't have been shipped in by railroad. Later on it might have.
Yes.
That's what I was gonna say, we watched a historical where they redid this engine number 3, and it was one of the fish trains. But I'm not sure if it was earlier than that, but it didn't have that. I guess they did run fish trains once they got started. But it's pretty cool, it's a history channel that has one of the trains, and they've redone it with the ice chest in it, like it was back then.
When we shipped out of this area, we had a lot of fruit orchards. And they shipped a lot of
Going on down in the corner of that little deep.
a lot of the Studebaker land, the plants land over on the Newfoundland Pike, that they reserved fruit orchards. And so they shipped a lot of that by train, and the trains on it out here between the railroad. So it was a pit and east of the house. Well, they did that a lot too, yeah. I doubt that.
Danny, when you're watching those shows, you don't think about that coming into the town, but that would probably only be that.
Anyone with questions? It doesn't have to be specifically from early New Carlisle. It can be anything. Okay. Yes.
Have you ever known what John Paul's sister's name was?
John Paul's sister name was, I believe, John Paul's sister's Mary. Yes. And his wife was Hannah.
But his sister was Mary.
Yes. And the other
They
three,
always refer to his sister in articles. They never name her.
yes.
I think it said Mary in here somewhere. I think I read it.
And I have no idea what the others were called. Like I said, it's very vague, the history about John Paul. And John Paul Sr., and we know a little about John Paul Jr., but still not much.
The one thing that's of interest about John Paul Sr., Dave, is you told him a story about how he got here originally.
Oh, when the Northwest Territory opened up, and
He was with Clark's
yes,
at the Battle of Pickwood.
I believe the article said, at least the article, and like I said, there's so many stories. The article I gave you actually said he stopped in this area, and the rest of the troops went up to Pickwood fought, and he actually ended up here, and he fell in love with this area so much that when they did open up this area, he actually wanted to move his family up here, and that's where the mystery begins, because some people believe that he was killed right near at the Ohio River in Cincinnati, and the rest of the family continued to come up here, which I kind of doubt, because how would they know where to get? I mean, he's the only one that was up here. So, but other than that, there's just a lot of mystery about it. And if you speak with New Carlisle historians, it's John Paul. But if you speak with someone from Springfield, they tend to go with Johnson, Donalds, and David Lowry as being the first settlers in Clark County.
David, I just want to mention, if you run the numbers, which I've been trying to do on driving me crazy with the numbers, but it worked out that John Paul Jr. was born in 1763, so that put him 26.